welcome to the stage Executive Director with Wildlife Protection Solutions, Eric Schmidt.
All right. Thank you all so much. It's really wonderful to be here with the opportunity to speak in front of you all today. Before I jump into the topic of how technology can help save endangered species, I'd like to take a bit of a step back and lay the foundation by saying that fundamentally an issue that conservationists face today is something that happens really across the business world in general. And that is, how do you deal with situations where you have knowledge gaps due to incomplete or imperfect information, and how do we respond to those? Specifically, what do we do in regard to prioritizing what do we work on, and how do we go about doing that? And I'd like to suggest to you all today that technology is really one of the things that can help fill in those knowledge gaps. And that's something that we at Wildlife Protection Solutions believe very much. In order to illustrate this point, I'd like you all to participate with me in a bit of a thought experiment. I would like you all to think of an endangered species in your mind right now, and I will mention a few endangered species, just 5. If I happen to mention the one that you've thought of, I'd like you all to just real briefly raise your hand. So we'll kick this off. Did anyone think of rhinos? Some people, all right. A few people know about the rhino poaching situation and what they're facing. What about tigers? Did anyone think of tigers? A few more, actually. Okay, very good. How about polar bears and some of the habitat loss issues they're facing? A few, all right. What about whales? A lot of Save the Whales type campaigns. Not as many of those, okay. And I suspect, last but not least, how about elephants? Yeah, more people certainly know the elephant story and what's going on there. So it's fairly obvious that we all know a little bit about the conservation story, but what I would like to do is actually take a bit of a closer look at what's really going on here. Fundamentally, the species all face different challenges, and that results in different species levels. For example, there are 3,200 tigers left in the world, around 20,000 polar bears, similar numbers for white rhinos, around 80,000 humpback whales, and in fact, according to the Great Elephant Census data that was just released, around 350,000 elephants in sub-Saharan Africa. So clearly, not all endangered species are on the same footing. Some are much closer to extinction. Since the room seem to know the story of the elephant the most, I'd like us all to keep those numbers in mind with the 350,000. And I'd like for you all to participate with me in one more thought experiment, if you will. Let's pretend for just a moment that we all collectively are the last people on Earth. So there's probably 300 of us here. Think for a minute about the implications for the human race on that fact. Some things that could happen are, well, odd events in nature, such as a fire or a flood or earthquakes, could potentially wipe us all out. Indeed, even if some of us caught a terrible disease, that could have drastic effects for all of the rest of the future of humanity. And I'm sure that you all would agree that were we in such a situation where we were all that was left, we should absolutely be a major conservation priority, especially relative to the numbers that we've seen thus far, like 350,000. A lot of people don't realize that there are a whole raft of animals in just such a situation. For example, the most endangered primate in the world, the Hainan black-crested gibbon, is down to only 20 animals left. In addition to that, the northern sportive lemur out of Madagascar, they're down to 50 animals. And this sort of thing happens in our backyard as well, where we have the situation of the red wolf down to only 75 animals. Now, what we've just seen here, we believe, is one of these knowledge gaps. Everyone is quite aware of the situation with elephants and rhinos and, these large, charismatic animals. But not many people are aware of these other mammals that are really quite endangered and, in fact, on the brink of extinction. So at Wildlife Protection Solutions, we wanted to address this and really raise awareness about these things. So one of the first things we've done is created an app that I would like to show you now. And what we did was we consulted a broad variety of both primary and secondary data sources, and we ran into the issue very quickly that a lot of this information isn't compiled in a way that can make sense to a broad variety of people. It's very much oriented toward researchers and academicians. So we decided to create something that is quite accessible and very easy to use. But we've categorized all of the information in different ways, but I believe the most powerful is of the 202 animals that we've been able to pull data together on. We have created these lists of various species that can go through and are prioritized based on how few animals there are remaining listed off toward most abundant. And of course, you can drill down into these and get more information about the ecology and biology of each of these. But we fundamentally believe that having these prioritized lists is going to be a key driver for future species conservation. And we ultimately hope that this will evolve into a platform that can be used by a variety of different stakeholders, from wildlife managers to researchers to volunteers to project funders, to really look and say, what are the endangered species that are literally at the brink of extinction, and what challenges are each of those facing? Because that information is not broadly available in the world right now. You really have to, as I say, be a part of the community of conservation or dig into it and look at the primary literature. Now, I would like to not leave you all with the impression that when an animal gets down to around 20 or so, that there's no hope left at all. In fact, just the opposite of that. I'd like to tell you the story of one particular animal that humanity was able to bring back from just such a situation. And that is actually the story of the white rhino. Now, believe it or not, if you had wanted to see a white rhino in the 1890s or so, you could have done so, but you would have had to have gone to a museum, and you would have seen something like this, a skeleton specimen or a stuffed specimen, because the animal was declared extinct at that time. It wasn't until about 1895 when two hunters in the extreme southern ends of South Africa discovered two rhinos, and the conservation world quickly realized, hey, this species may have a second shot and a real chance here. So they established a park in an area called Umfolozi and quickly did surveys to understand how many of these animals really are left. And around 1900, there were 20. Just by protecting the park and keeping the animals in place, that population grew naturally to around 400 in 1940. And that's when this man, Dr. Ian Player, got involved. Now, he said, look, 400 is a good population, but we need to be spreading these animals out so that things like floods and fires and disease aren't going to take them all out, potentially. And so he developed ways to dart the rhinos, translocate the rhinos, transport them, rewild them, relocate them. And he was so successful at this that not only was he able to repopulate rhinos through the rest of South Africa, but to all of sub-Saharan Africa as well. Now, he didn't stop there. He said, no, we need insurance populations so that rhinos can be a global presence. And so he then took them to places like San Diego Zoo, safari parks, and other nature reserves around the world. So literally, if you've ever seen a white rhino in the zoo, it's because of the efforts of that man. And today, there are some 20,000 white rhinos in the world, which is a pretty incredible comeback story. We believe that this is an incredible blueprint for species conservation worldwide. And we also believe that technology can help the efforts of species recovery on a global basis. In order to do that, however, we've got to sort of marry these disparate worlds, right? You've got the world of technology and the world of nature, and they don't always play well together. So in order to figure out those details, somebody has to spend a lot of time in thorn trees, as it turns out. That's where my staff comes in. But not only do they need to do that, they need to be working with the technology in these field-type environments so that we can really gain an understanding of what types of technology work, what don't, how can we improve the ones that aren't. And then, of course, the local residents get a chance at disrupting everything. It turns out baboons actually really love to chew on battery cables, and ants love to build all sorts of nests in cameras and the like. So we at Wildlife Protection Solutions have sorted through these details over the past 3.5 years, both in our field operations in South Africa as well as Indonesia. And we've now got a very stable and solid platform that we can expand on a global basis. This process really starts by doing site surveys and understanding the given ecology of a region. What are the species involved? What are the threats to the species? How big an issue is poaching? Are there local communities relying on these species for various things? From there, we also need to look at what kind of technology are we going to bring out, and specifically, how are we going to power it? Followed closely by how are we going to get the information from this technology back in real time? So we focus a lot on establishing long-range connectivity to a variety of different field devices that we then deploy. And then finally, we work with a lot of local partners to really understand their personnel, processes, and practices so that we make sure that they can take the greatest advantage of this technology that they possibly can. Finally, we train those partners so that they can not only maintain and use the system, but ultimately expand it in an ongoing fashion. So this is fundamentally what Wildlife Protection Solutions is about. How does this look in the field? Well, it starts off with, as I mentioned earlier, a variety of different field sensors. Oftentimes those are cameras or video feeds, GPS tagged items ranging from animals themselves to vehicles to ranger radar and radio signals, to fence and perimeter detection systems, as well as internal data sets. All of those become our raw elements that we feed into our technology system, and that's distributed through either standard cell phone towers, private repeater networks, or long-range mesh and Wi-Fi networks that we have deployed literally across thousands of acres in the middle of South African and Indonesian wilderness. From there, the information flows into threat detection routines, which do things like analyze videos for people or images for the same. And the information then hits the Four Winds platform and is distributed globally to a variety of different stakeholders, not only rangers in the field through mobile apps, but to regional dispatch centers, as well as a network operating center that we maintain here in Denver. We carry this concept a step farther and in fact have a group of dedicated volunteers who monitor the feeds from a variety of these different reserves that we work with to be on the lookout for things like poaching or wildlife crime and the like. So I'd like to show you that system actually live. Are you all up for a bit of a trip to Africa here? Yeah? All right. Let's do it. Okay, so this is the primary dashboard that we roll out to dispatch centers. And the first thing you'll notice is the two leading predictors of poaching are actually right in front of you. Turns out that moon phase and weather conditions are incredible predictors of whether or not there will be poaching incidents. And if it's a full moon and it's good weather, we are on high alert. I can drill down into this and go into the alerts key here. And what the software is doing is going and pulling in all of the live images that are taken from our field cameras in South Africa and presenting that to us in a real-time fashion here. Now, this is not only an incredible reporting tool that can be monitored and responded to, but we can also use this as an incident management system as well. So, for example, I can hit edit, and I have a wide variety of different data sets that I can go in and manage and manipulate. So if I need to say that a ranger was dispatched to location A, or I need to note that there was a leopard in location B for future scientific research, I can do all of those things here. Now, as you all are undoubtedly aware, being in the technology world, anytime you put a piece of tech out there, you also want to make sure that it's going to be working and in fact is working. So for that reason, we developed this camera status view, and you can see at a glance Images with green and yellow dots, sometimes red, those indicate, incidentally, that the images or the cameras may or may not be functioning. And so they prompt us to go out and either inspect the cameras, or in this case, we can go in and hit the update key, and that prompts the system to send a message directly to the connected camera that says, take a new image, please send that back to me right there. Incidentally, this is pretty incredible. There's a picture of a leopard that just came in a little bit ago. That's cool. So having said all of that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about some of these outcomes that we've seen from the implementing the system in a wide variety of different locations here. The first one we actually should have guessed, but it was a bit of a surprise to us, frankly. The fact that you get such an incredible view into the world of wildlife when you have all of these cameras out there flowing into a system that you can watch. And I'd like to illustrate this with a bit of a story. This guy appeared to me one day in the camera feed, and what that is, for those of you who might not be familiar, is an impala. But more specifically, it's a very freaked out impala. And when I saw it, its legs are going all over like this, and I said, boy, something's really got his attention. What could that be? So I watched the camera feed for a little bit, and the next image that came through was this one of a herd pretty clearly on the move. And I said, well, gosh, what could scare an animal that way, like that, the first time, and then set these guys running? And sure enough, within about 3 minutes, this one came through as well. And this eye shine, it might be a little hard to see here, but that's a leopard literally looking for the groceries at 2 in the morning in South Africa time. So these 3 panels I love because they tell such an incredible story, and they connect us to the wild world that we would otherwise not even have any sort of visibility into. Some other incredible outcomes that have come from our experience with this, I'd like to tell the story of this fellow. This is actually in a very remote part of a park in South Africa. And one morning, we saw on the feed this guy come in about 6 a.m. South African time. And we said, well, he doesn't really look like staff. So we got a hold of the game ranger and said, is this an intruder, or who is this fellow? Turns out no one really knew, so it's probably someone up to no good. The next day, about 6 a.m., we took another photo of him, this time pretty clearly tracking things, presumably for poaching. And the next day, similar sort of thing. Same guy, same kind of behavior, same time. So we've been conversing with the game rangers and the wardens this whole time and saying, there's a pattern here. Every day this fellow comes in about 6. And they said, we'll set an ambush. And indeed, the next day he came in, actually with a group of people, but they got the surprise of their lives, and we got to see the whole chase go down right in front of all of the cameras. So literally on this image, it's a little hard to see, I apologize. There are a group of people at the very top. Those are the poachers running away, and this fellow down here is the game warden in hot pursuit. They were ultimately able to catch these fellows and remand them to the appropriate authorities. And so that's a pretty positive outcome. The final story I'd like to tell today here, it relates to a particular reserve that bordered a township. And there were known poachers in this township, and this reserve has rhinos on it. Rhinos, as we know, endangered species. And they were asking for our help. They said, please, we're desperately concerned that there's going to be poaching here at our reserve. And so we did the site assessments I mentioned, and working with the local people, we realized, hey, really there are natural choke points that people are going to come in and intrude on this property if there's going to be poaching incidents. Some of them happen to be things like the bridge that you see there. So the first thing we did was wire up that area with these cameras, and sure enough, within about 2 weeks, we saw one evening, about 2 at night, South Africa time, it was midday our time, these 2 characters coming on. And it turns out those guys are the scouts. And they were looking for rhinos to inform this guy, who was about 10 minutes behind them. Now, if you look closely at this image, you'll see that what he's actually carrying is a high-powered rifle with a silencer on it. So he is absolutely out to kill rhinos this evening. Now, although the local people have access to all of these images, because it was 2 in the morning, they did not catch any of these images coming in. But interestingly enough, here in Colorado, one of our volunteers using the app was able to see this image, follow our standard operating procedures that we had put in place with the groups prior, alert us, and we were able to call down and get ahead of the head warden, get a hold of the head warden, and activate the rhino protection units. So within literally 10 minutes, they had a scramble on, and we saw this image come through on the cameras as well. These are heavily armed guys in hot pursuit. Now, what ensued then was a firefight, and that prompted these poachers to literally drop their weapon and flee the area. And the immediate upshot of this action was that 3 rhinos that were all in the area were saved. We were also able to see the crime scene analysis as well. So for us at Wildlife Protection Solutions, we believe that it's all about taking this real-time data and getting it out into the wide world so that we can understand what's going on and respond to it in real time. Now, if I may, on a personal note, the reason that story is so incredible to me is because for all of us who live here in America or in a city anywhere or the suburbs, it's so easy to basically say, hey, look, I'm not involved in wildlife crime. I don't go poach rhinos. I don't cut down forests illegally. It's not my problem. And that's that next easy logical leap. It's not my problem. And therefore, there's nothing I can really do about it. And I would like to suggest to you all today that for the first time in the history of humanity, perhaps, there is something we can all do about it. Because literally, animals were saved because a person watching in Denver, Colorado, saw something in South Africa and did something about it. And this is what inspires me so much about the technology that Four Winds has donated to this cause, what we're bringing to the table. But we need your help. Ultimately, whether you're interested in volunteering, watching the apps, sponsoring a camera, getting your own feed, and becoming intimately connected with a place in the world that you would otherwise not see what's happening in all the time, or if you have access to technologies, field sensors, power, remote long-distance communication, all of these things are what we can leverage to make a positive impact for the planet. And I encourage you, this is the start of an incredible movement of having millions of sensors out there, thousands of cameras, and thousands of people who are all watching over and keeping safe what is so important to this planet and what makes life so special. I thank you all so much for your time.